All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Hands On. My name is Alana, and I'm from the Innovation Cluster. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Innovation Cluster, we are a not-for-profit organization that supports startups working in innovation. So we do so by offering advisory services, access to partners in workshops such as this one. So we encourage you to apply if you have an innovative idea or startup working in technology, and you can do that by going to www.innovationcluster.ca. So again, welcome to Hands-On Introduction to Project Management with Pinnguaq. This workshop is intended to provide you with an intro to project management and the key considerations when selecting a methodology. So an overview of two approaches will be provided along with a more in-depth look at popular methodologies. So today we have Steve and Vanessa, and I'm just going to quickly pass it to Steve to introduce Pinnguaq further and for us to get started.
Yeah, thanks, Alana. Great to be on with you all this afternoon. Super excited to see such a good amount of people that signed up for this and gave us some time on a Tuesday afternoon out of your day. So thanks for coming on with us. My name is Steve. I work with the organization Pinnguaq. Pinnguaq is the Inuktitut word for play, and we do a lot of stuff with teaching digital skills and sort of STEAM skills to kids, teens, and adults. Of course, today is mostly focused on adults. If there's kids on here, you might be a little bit bored, but adults will make it fun for you. We have a number of different locations across Canada. Our sort of roots are in territory in Nunavut and in Iqaluit, but we also have an office and makerspace in Lindsay. So it's really excited to be partnering with the Innovation Cluster to put this on for folks in this area. I'm not going to be doing the full lesson today. It's going to be Vanessa on with us, sort of the expert in the room that's going to be teaching us about project management. Before I pass it over to Vanessa, though, I've worked with Vanessa for quite a while, and I know she really likes people asking questions during the lesson. So if you're new to Zoom, there's like some really nice ways you can ask questions without feeling like you're just like interrupting mid-sentence. One of those, if you're sort of new to Zoom, there's an option to like raise your hand, even if your camera is not on. Depending on what version of Zoom you're using, at the bottom bar, the options, you might have a little smiley face with reactions, and in there's a raise hand button. If you don't see that button, it's usually in like the participants area. You'll see a participants button and like a list of everyone's name, and in that area you can raise a hand. And when that happens, you'll see like over me a little hand shows up. That's a good way to be like, you want to ask a question at an appropriate time, we'll call on you. But you can also use the chat as well. It's a good way. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat for any questions, and I will happily interrupt Vanessa to ask those questions to her. We've also got the live transcription available for this workshop. You should also see in the menu a little live transcript option. You can turn the subtitles on and off. So if you're needing that, it is available. Otherwise, Vanessa, if you're ready to go, I'll pass it over to you.
Let's do it. Yeah, hi folks. My name is Vanessa, as Steve said. I work with Pinnguaq and a few other not-for-profits across the country to support them on launching and managing projects and initiatives. And so super excited today to be here with you all to chat through that. I'm going to share my screen so I can show you my slides as we go. But as Steve said, please interrupt at any time if you have questions, and I will do my best to answer. We don't have a ton of time today, so I'm going to try and get through as much as we can. But don't hesitate to ask questions so we make sure that you get any specific information you need to help you be successful in your next project. All right, now, can everyone see my screen? And by my screen, I mean an intro to project management slide deck. Yes? Beautiful. All right, so today's objectives. My hope is by the end of this short session, we're able to identify as a team what is business as usual, what is our day-to-day work, and what actually is a project, and when we would want to initiate a project management plan. We're going to go through, and hopefully by the end, you can identify and compare different project management methodologies. So we're going to be looking at the two largest ones today. There are a few others, but we'll focus on those two for now. We'll go through the phases of project management, and we'll have a few moments throughout to access and work through some resources for each phase, in hopes that can help you be successful with those resources after we leave you today. And then, of course, because this is a bit of a short time period, we'll be looking at some of these resources and tools, but we will make sure through Alana and through the Innovation Hub that we give you access to any of the tools that we talk about today, as well as our contact information should you have any questions. All right. Also, as you may have already realized, I'm a relatively fast talker, so also don't hesitate to jump in and ask me to repeat something or to slow down. I try very hard to talk slowly. It is not my strong suit. I know that for a fact, and that's okay. It's good to know where you can improve. All right. Oops. What is a project? So project management. First, we have to define what is a project. So the Project Management Institute defines a project specifically as a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. And so all projects should have a goal. You want something, an outcome at the end of it. You want to make sure you have a timeline, so it starts and it ends. That's very important that a project is time boxed. A really clear budget to ensure you're able to be successful with your project, as well as stakeholders, and then of course a project manager, which is why you're all here today. So I see a lot of this with new businesses and even growing and scaling businesses where we struggle sometimes to identify between what is business as usual, what is our day-to-day, what we do, and what is a specific project. So I sort of broke down here in these two columns, the differences between the two. So projects, again, they're a one-off task. So it's a task to manage and implement a change or a new product within your organization. That's super important. It's useful and it's really important to identify and manage risks within a project. Projects are new, so they're inevitably going to be riskier, and there's going to be variables and unknown components to it. And so project planning and project plan management has a framework and a structure so you can identify and mitigate for risks in a way you may not need to for business as usual. Projects should all have an implementation process. So by the end of a project, you want to be able to implement this change. You want to pass off this product. You want to make sure that this project ends and it can move into that business as usual day-to-day work. Projects are also often funded as a standalone initiative. So it's not necessarily built into the operational budget of your company. This is something new that you're taking on and you've allocated specific dollars to it, or you should allocate specific dollars to it, because that's really important in helping you be successful. Business as usual, on the other hand, is the ongoing function in the day-to-day work that you do within your company. So if you're an event planning company, putting on an event might actually be your business as usual. If you're doing it for the first time, that can be a project, but once it's moved into the implementation and you're running experiences more frequently, you shouldn't need to, or I would discourage the full implementation of a project management system for each event that you go to, because it's going to get really heavy after a while. So those are the differences between business as usual and project management. Another example I like to use is a project might be the implementation and building of a new HR management system, whereas the business as usual steps in once that HR system is ready to be implemented and you move it into your company and you've handed it off, that closes off the project and it moves into business as usual. So those are there too. Now, what is project management? Why are we all here today? So project management is really the application of knowledge and skills and tools and techniques to meet your project goals within a specific time period. I get a lot of questions about what's the best system, what's the best tool, how do I put something in place to automate the management of a project? The unfortunate answer is that there isn't really the best tool. There isn't a silver bullet that's going to solve all your project management issues and challenges. There really is no replacement for strong project management and a strong project manager. but we're going to give you some tips and tricks today to make it easier. So why is it important? A lot of folks often, and I've seen this in a lot of new companies especially as well, they can kind of underestimate the necessity of project management because they're used to doing things on their own, they're used to being scrappy and wearing many hats, and that's awesome. But projects, because they're unique, because they're new, the risks and the issues that can come up with them can be really challenging. And if we put in place really strong framework early on, we're able to mitigate for those quickly and keep our team motivated and on track. So project management is super important. It allows for predictable project planning. So you know what's upcoming, your team knows what's upcoming. If you have clients or stakeholders, they're all on the same page with you. It allows you to stick to your project budgets, especially if you're a new company or a not-for-profit working in those spaces. Having clear outline of your budget and how you're working towards it or how you're spending it is critical to make sure that you come in under or exactly on budget. It also, again, because it's new, projects have the opportunity for lots of roadblocks. And so having a project manager and having a project management system in place allows you to identify those roadblocks early on and mitigate or resolve them as you go. It also allows you to, and we'll get into this in the initiation phase of project management, but it allows you to identify and terminate projects that may not actually be helpful to your organization. So you want to make sure that you're not moving forward with a project for project's sake. You want to make sure that your return on investment is there and you're doing what's best for your business, for your team, and for your clients. Project management framework can also help improve collaboration across teams and within teams. And again, especially when there's so many other pieces going on and you're taking on a new project, having that collaboration and that communication architecture is really critical to making sure that your teams are connected and motivated and working together well. All that to say, as a project manager, you wear many hats. Also, I really like GIFs and I put them into a lot of presentations, so get ready. So, project management methodologies. Project management methodologies generally fit into two large buckets, which we're going to talk through quickly today. So there are a few smaller ones, but the two that you usually hear about within the industry and the two that I've operated within most frequently are called traditional sequential project management. It's often referred to as waterfall project management because that is the system that like most people use when they're going with traditional sequential project management methodology. And the second one is called Agile project management. So these are the systems that identify how we are managing our project. So you'll use similar resources between them both, but the cadence of meetings, the types of projects we're running will help you identify which of these two project management methodologies are best for your project. I have found, and a 2019 survey corroborated, that most organizations often use a combination of them both. And that's okay. And it actually can be really helpful, but understanding how they work independently is really important before you bring them together to combine them. So the first one, traditional project management methodology, which is like really just a mouthful. So this methodology is often like the most common sense way of applying a project plan. So you have your start and you have your finish. It is sequentially mapping out the tasks and the steps that you need to take to get from point A to point B. It's really ideal for projects that might end up or might result in like a physical construction, like a house. You can't build the roof of a house before the foundation. So you know there are really clear deliverables and steps that you need to accomplish before you move on to the next one. It's really predictable. Every outcome, every dependency should be clear within this sequence. So if you know from start to finish how you're getting from point A to point B, traditional project management might be right up your alley. It's not as like innovative and fun perhaps as the agile project management, which I'll get to in a second, but I'm a huge fan of waterfall and traditional project management methodologies for smaller projects or ones where I know exactly what's happening, because it takes off that lift that you'll hear about in the agile project management that's needed to keep that like innovative collaboration going. So one example of traditional sequential project management methodology, waterfall, this is the one that most folks think about when they hear traditional project management. And so as you can see from this drawing, it really is, it starts at the top of the waterfall and it ends at the bottom. And once you're like over that first bump, it's really hard to get back to the top. This system is not set up to jump back into planning once you've moved into the design of your process. So you want to make sure that you know exactly where you're going before you jump into this particular project management methodology. So it can be tough on larger projects or projects where you have a lot of unknown because it has a really rigid structure. But again, it can be easier on the project manager because you know, okay, Tuesday, I'm getting this specific thing from team A and I'm passing it to team B, and I don't need to like worry about any sort of delays or issues there because I've already mapped out where it is we're going and how. Agile project management methodology, on the other hand, is definitely growing in popularity. It's really popular within the tech space. This is the one that I've actually used more often, and I'm a huge fan of it, but it does have a heavy lift on the project manager. It prioritizes shorter iterative cycles. So instead of going from initiation, planning, design, execution, and we're done, it sort of does this like initiation, planning, design, execution. And then we replan, we redesign, we re-execute. We replan, we redesign, we re-execute as we move through to the end of our project, which is really awesome for technical projects, for ones where you maybe are not sure what your end result fully is. If you want to have that flexibility or that opportunity to test things with like industry experts, Agile project management can be really, really helpful for that. I don't recommend Agile project management for smaller, shorter projects, again, because the lift or the necessity for that iteration and that innovation, it has a really robust like meeting cadence and schedules to keep folks on track and to ensure we're collaborating. And for shorter projects, that's sometimes just not the best use of everyone's time. To visualize Agile project management, there's sort of, I'm going to talk about two versions today that we're going to get into. So one of them is called Scrum, which is very similar to also just Agile project management, but it's one of my personal favorites. So for Scrum, you have your list of tasks and activities, or sprints, and this is what they use in this methodology. That's the language they use. So you have your activities and you take each one at one time and work through that cycle of planning and iterating and executing and designing. And it takes usually about 2 to 4 weeks to go through a task and an activity. And you have a daily meeting every day to say, where are we? What's our progress? What's everyone working on today? Great, go. And so again, for larger projects or larger teams, this is a really handy like collaborative process that allows you to be really innovative, because every day you're meeting and every day you can pivot. You don't want to, pivot all of the time, but this structure allows you to if you genuinely have to. So it's good for things that need to like ship quickly. Netflix uses this, fun fact. Netflix uses a 2-week sprint like time frame. And so I'm not sure if you have the Netflix app or you see, but they actually ship their updates for their tech products every 2 weeks because they are working through a 2-week Scrum sprint. So that's very fun. Another version of Agile project management, which is used slightly less often, but is a really great visual project management tool, is called Kanban. And so for this one, I've often seen it on a whiteboard, or I've used it on a whiteboard, but this is like the visual of it, where you have these kind of columns to identify the progress of a task. So instead of it moving through cycles, it's like something is here in the ideas of the to-do phase, something is in progress or it's partially done, we're testing anything that's in this phase, and this is our work that's complete and we're ready to ship it to our clients. So Kanban can be really helpful, especially for projects that don't necessarily have strict timelines. You can add like a timeline structure to Kanban. I often do when I use it, but it in and of itself is not about deadlines. It's just about visualizing where along like the progress bar your tasks and your projects are. I kind of think of this one, it's a weird example, but go with me. I kind of think of this one as like a grocery store. They have a lot of backstock in their like storage facilities, but they only put out on the shelves what they need to. And so it's like the stuff that's coming, that's on the shelf is in progress. They have their to-do in the back, but they don't move any of the to-dos to the front until they're done the products that are there. And that's sort of how Kanban works. You want to make sure that you're not moving anything from your to-do list to your partially done or into your testing. until you're ready and until you've sort of cleared some of the backlog of the things that need to be tested, the things that are partially finished, you're moving them through this, hopefully in a really like easily managed and like simple way. So quick review between the two. So again, traditional project management, you're divided into these distinct phases that don't necessarily repeat. Ideally, they don't. Your scope for changing requirements is really limited. You've mapped out point A to point B. You know what you're doing every day of this project within reason. But it's helpful because it's super predictable, right? It's not ideal for larger scale projects or ones where you don't maybe necessarily know the entire project. It does require every step to be known up front, or the majority of the steps to be known up front. But it is, because of that, super easy to manage because each phase has its own agreed upon deliverables and how you're going to get there. Traditional project management is really great for simple projects and small projects, and it clearly outlines responsibilities of each team member. Agile, on the other hand, again, it works through sprints and phases that repeat in each sprint. So you can go through a stage and repeat and iterate and have a moment of innovation when you're going through these projects. So it's really great if you're not fully sure of the solution you're building. It's super flexible and adaptive model, which allows for change. Not as useful for smaller projects. That's not to say you can't use it, but I have found for smaller projects, the amount of work it takes to keep an agile project up is just not really worth it. And so I don't recommend this version for smaller projects. Though it does follow an iterative design process, and testing happens at each phase. So in traditional project management, you usually only test before you're ready to close your project. Whereas in Agile, because you're innovating and iterating at every phase, you test quite often. And so again, it's like really powerful and positive if you need that flexibility. It's kind of overkill if you don't need that flexibility. Agile is really great for these like cross-functional teams because it gives a lot of flexibility also to your teams. So how to choose the right methodology? Great question that I'm asking myself. So you want to start with the end in mind. Again, if you know it's really small, if you have your goals and objectives outlined and you're really clear on how you get there, traditional is a great system to use for that. Are there definite materials or expectations that your client has or that you have for your team? If not, it might be beneficial to move into an agile project management. And especially if there's no components set in stone. The second piece I really like to talk about, and often gets forgotten when you're thinking about project management, as a project manager, you're also a little bit of a people manager. You're managing your team and you're managing staff to get through this project appropriately. And so you want to make sure that you assess what's already working. Do you have a team that really loves clear deadlines and clear expectations? Or do you have a team that wants to be a part of that collaboration process, that wants to come into a space and whiteboard and talk through solutions? So if you have a team that wants clear guidelines, give them a traditional project management methodology. Like, don't try to go against the grain there. Whereas if your team excels in a collaborative environment, then you may have to put yourself in a position to undertake that agile project management methodology. All right, so quick check-in. And I would love if everyone could take a moment to go into the chat or raise your hand if you want to say it out loud. And I'd love to hear from the team and from the group, which project management methodology do you feel, if you have a project on the go already, best fits your project? It could be one, it could be both. But super curious about that. And then also curious for any questions that you have so far about project management methodologies specifically. That's awesome. Thank you, folks. I'm seeing a lot of waterfall. I feel like I'm scaring people off of Agile. I swear it's really great, but I see so many young project managers going into an Agile project and you're like, so this really actually would do really good if you just gave folks a task list. So that's really awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for those who answered. And that's really great. Oh, Nat, great question. The short answer is it really depends on your team, unfortunately. Like I've seen short projects that are a week or two and they're complete. Whereas like a longer project might look like 6 months to a year. That being said, the timeline for the project, I would say actually, and I apologize if this was unclear, should come second to like the types of tasks you're completing in a project. So you could have a 2-week agile project because you don't know all of the requirements or the resources you're going to need as you go. And so that's a really short project or timeline for a project, but the resources and the like not knowing those expectations and goals would be more beneficial in an agile project management space versus the waterfall. Does that kind of answer your question, Nat? Perfect. And like also, if I answer your question and you have a follow-up, again, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. And I apologize if I say this name wrong. Avantika, I can definitely try and explain those again. So I'm gonna backtrack for just a moment to the agile approaches. So yeah, so Scrum and Kanban are two most commonly used in Agile. Scrum is one where you take a specific task or activity, which we call sprints. You take a specific task and that becomes your focus for that 2 to 4 weeks. That's what you're working on, is completing that product or completing that task within your broader project management like scale. And so there's a daily sprint as you're going through a Scrum. So every day for that 2 to 4 weeks, you meet in the morning and you outline the tasks that you need to accomplish by the end of the day. And then the next day you meet, you gut check on where you got that day before, and then you outline the tasks for the day ahead again. So this is like really intensive. Everyone is full focused on this task as you move through it. And then once that task or activity is complete, it becomes shipped or completed. You move it off to your client or to the finished bucket of your project management like system. So that one's the Scrum and Agile. Kanban is another version of Agile project management that's super helpful to visualize where your tasks, like the progress of your tasks as you're going through. So you may apply some similar tactics in Kanban as you do in the Scrum methodology, where you get into a task and you focus really closely on the partly done or the almost finished. But with Kanban, you are able to sort of keep a few balls in the air if you're a juggler. And so you can be testing a few components while you're completing those some other components as well. But the point is you have a really clear visual understanding of the progress of each task, and so does your team. I hope that kind of made sense. All right. Wonderful. So what makes a project successful? So understanding what makes a project successful feels like it should be like really simple, feels like it's something everyone should know how to do. And yet there's so often I see projects started without project managers, without project teams, and we run into this challenge. So you know a project's been successful if you've met the business requirements. So when you've decided on a project, you know what you want out of it. You know what your return on investment is. You're putting in a lot of time and energy and probably money. So you should know really clearly what is that business requirement. And once you get to the end, that had better be met. So you want to make sure that it's delivered on schedule, and you want to make sure that it's delivered on budget. Again, especially for small businesses, especially for nonprofits, you don't want to be wasting funds. You want to make sure you're really clearly utilizing them effectively and efficiently, and having a clear management system. By the end of this project, you should have done that, which would be great. So you have resulted in the desired like business and return on investment. That's a bit of a repeat from the first one. I should edit this slide. But you, most importantly, to me, is you have a motivated and effectively managed team. This one often falls to the wayside. Folks get really caught up in the to-do lists and the task lists and deadlines, but your team is the thing that is going to be driving the success of this project. They are the actioners, yourself included. And so you want to make sure that they're motivated, they have a clear understanding of where they're going, and you're all on the same page as you move forward through this project. So I'll talk on this a lot as we go through the phases of project management, but that's one that often gets overlooked, is the people management component. So, phases of project management. Once you've chosen your methodology, you know you're working more within waterfall or agile or perhaps a hybrid of both. You then move into the phases of project management. Now, the phases, how you execute within them might look a little bit different as you go through, but overall, you're still accomplishing the same tasks in each phase as you move through project management. So the 5 project management phases, or process groups as they are sometimes called, because each phase has a number of processes within it. The 5 project management phases are initiation, planning, executing and monitoring, which happen in tandem, but they are 2 separate phases, and then the closing of the project. So we're going to start talking about initiation, and we're going to try our best. This is a large group, but I'm hoping we can do a little bit of like a hands-on independent testing as we go. Full disclosure, this is my first time running the hands-on component with such a large group, so this will be fun. It's going to be great. All right, initiation. First phase of your project management time, or your project management cycle. And your goal here is to define the project. You want to have a really clear understanding of where you're going, wherever possible, how you're getting there. You've developed the business case, and you may have to get it approved. Depending where you sit within an organization, you may have like a sponsor or a supervisor or a client that you need to have approve the initiation of this project. Now, this GIF is important. I know not everyone loves meetings, myself included. However, when you're working in a project, you want to make sure that you're getting all of the insights of the diverse groups that you're going to be working with. So that's clients, that's stakeholders, that's the team members that are going to be working with you on this project. So the initiation phase, I find, has a lot of gut checking meetings with folks within your org or external to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to set this project up for success. Some key activities in this phase are performing a feasibility study. Is this project even possible? Like, are we building a rocket ship to Mars and we don't even know if we can get there? You want to make sure you've done a feasibility study and you've identified that this is in fact doable. Creating a project charter, and this is going to be the thing we do together today as a little bit of an exercise, but creating a project charter is your foundation and your like framework that you build the project plan out of. So you want to make sure you have a really clear project charter before you move forward. Identifying your key stakeholders and team. Again, like this is the time where you're identifying who's going to be most involved in this project and when, and you want to make sure that A, they're available, B, that they've approved on it, and C, you want to start building that rapport with folks so that as you move into planning and executing, you have that rapport and that like collaborative spirit already going, so that when things go wrong, as they may do in a project, you already have had these conversations with them, and you're more comfortable moving in that direction. You have that relationship built. You also, during the initiation phase, will find or select some project management tools. These may be tools that already exist within your organization, or they may be ones that are new to you and you want to like test them before you bring in your whole team on it. All right. So in our initiation phase, we need to build a project charter. And I chose this for the activity because I really do think it's an important factor in starting up a project. It can seem like unnecessary paperwork. However, as a project manager, this is the thing I fall back to when clients come to me with new ideas that they have for a project. This is the thing that I come back to when someone tries to cut my budget. This is the piece that I come back to when a team member is unclear on the guidelines. So having a project charter is so helpful as a project manager because it's a support system for you. So you're not necessarily being the like bad guy. You're just upholding the charter that you and your team and your clients have all agreed upon before. I hope that kind of makes sense. So project charter, it outlines your shared understanding of your project scope, development, the objectives. It defines your roles and responsibilities of each person involved. And again, they should approve this so that moving forward, you have their support. Some key components that I like to have in my project charter are a business case statement and scope. So what is actually happening in this project? What is this project for? What is the success criteria? How do we know when we've achieved what we set out to achieve? How to set a success criteria, how to set the right goals and milestones is like a whole other workshop that I do run. I will share some resources on it with you afterwards. But I also am happy to set up like one additional session for one-on-one if folks need to review those pieces. I was going to talk about it at the end. I will chat more about it then, but I wanted to let you all know because it's success criteria and how to set one can feel really heavy. So you've outlined your major requirements and deliverables. You've put together a budget outline. You have your schedules and your milestones outlined. Any constraints and assumptions. So what do we know and what do we not know, but we're going to make an assumption. And what are some of the risks we might have already identified or be worried about or thinking about at this time, as well as like team that's going to be on board, and then approvals from our team, from our clients and ourselves that we agree to what's set out in our charter. So we're going to try a practice. Very excited about it. If I switch to this tab, can you all still see it? Does it say copy document now, Stephen? Beautiful. Okay, perfect. Before I do that, I'm going back for a second and then I will go to it. Okay, so we're going to build our own project charter. Now filling out a project charter can take weeks. We're not going to go and interview stakeholders at this point, but we are going to take a quick pass at looking through a project charter together. And I'm going to give you each some time independently, and we'll share a link with you with a copy of this. So you can go through and try and populate it yourself and see where maybe you need more information, or the goal would be what's something that you learned that was brand new in this project charter, or perhaps something that you're, a question you need more clarification on. So I'll share a link in a moment and you'll see a screen like this when you click it, and you're just going to click make a copy, and it's going to make a copy. All right. And it'll bring you to this template of a project charter. This one's not perhaps the most beautiful. It's just a really standard template. Depending on which company I work with, sometimes I jazz it up, but this does have the key components that you want to have captured in your project charter. So a title, the version of this project charter, because if you need to go into negotiations with a client or with your team to review it, you want to make sure you have a history of every project charter and where those changes happened, so that if a supervisor comes back to you in 3 weeks and is like, why didn't we capture this in the scopes of our project charter, you can identify like, hey, that was actually a part of version 1 and here's why we removed it. So having that history is really important, again, to like have your own back. So when people have questions or things go a little bit awry, you've done your due diligence to keep things organized and keep track of all that information. Otherwise, the rest of this is like relatively clear. So I'm going to share the link in a second so you can see and go through it on your own. Awesome. Yeah, Allison, great point. And often something that gets overlooked in that initiation phase is the team piece. And again, like as a project manager, you're walking that people management line. You want to make sure you have the support and the buy-in from that team right off the get-go. And so including them in that project charter, very critical. Shaylin, I apologize if I'm not saying that right, but I think that's how you say it. Yeah, an example of a constraint. Great question. So a constraint is something that we like already know is going to hold us back. So one example might be today, for example, as a result of COVID, or perhaps this is always how it's supposed to be, but in my mind, as a result of COVID, we're hosting the session online versus in person. And so one constraint that I had coming into this session is like, we can't all whiteboard together. I'm not going to be able to see all your faces and watch to see if your eyes are glazing over as I talk about a topic. So it's something like that that would hold you back that you already know. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that you need to consider. Another one would be if you're running an experience or an event and it needs to be outside, you know you're only going to have limited electrical, or you won't have shelter in the case of like weather. So I hope that kind of makes sense. It's like something you know is going to affect the outcome of your project that you want to sort of mitigate for. Budget is another big one that's often a constraint. We can't do everything we want because we don't have the budget for it. Anyways, I hope that was helpful. And Kelly had a really good point and question, and I think this was a direct message, so you may not have seen it, but Kelly put out that, you know, she's used project charter in like a waterfall methodology, but wouldn't know how to change it in the Agile. And that's like a great question and a great point. And so it's something that can be really challenging with the Agile project management methodologies. However, the goal or the hope is that the components within a project charter shouldn't change, even within Agile. So you know where you're going, but how you get there might differ. And so to Kelly's point, if you're pivoting a little bit within Agile, your milestones or the deliverables might not have the same detail as you would within a waterfall methodology, but you still know if you're launching, let's say you're launching a tech product, like you know you want a product out there. I'm trying to think of an example as I talk. I'm going to give myself a second to think of the right example. Let's say I want an app that's going to allow people to order food from home, like Uber Eats. I know that I want folks to be able to get food and have it delivered to their house. I might not know yet if I want that to be an app for your phone, if I want it to be a website, if I want it to be a phone number they call, but I know at the end, I want folks to be able to have food delivered to their house. Does that kind of make sense? Like, you know where your end goal is, the how you get there are the pieces that feel a little less concrete. Hoping that makes some sense. All right, I'm going to give us 10 more seconds to think of any questions for this specific or comments for this specific component. And then Barbara did have a question, and I apologize, this was a little while back, but she did have a question or a comment, sorry, around the different roles within Agile project methodology. And that's a really good point. Unfortunately, we don't have like all the time in the world, so I wasn't able to go through each and every role. However, when we move into like the planning and execution phase, I'm going to try and touch on some of the key roles within both waterfall and Agile project management that folks need to keep top of mind as we go through it. All right, we're just about at the halfway mark, which is mind-blowing to me. So I want to take a quick break, especially being in the Zoom world. I'm sure a lot of us have been on Zoom since like 9 a.m. So let's take a 5-minute break. We'll say 12:55, we'll come back. I recommend you move your body, grab some water, step away from your screen, or at least look away from your screen. And then we'll move on to phase 2 of project management, which is planning. And Alana, I'm going to mute myself again for this break. So can you unmute me after? Thank you. All right, I'll see you all in 5 minutes, or 4 minutes now. Let's say 4 minutes. Okay. Phase 2, welcome back. Actually, sorry, before we move forward, you've had 5 minutes now to process about an hour's worth of information, like 40 minutes worth of information. I guess, like, curious, coming back from the break, give you 10 seconds to answer this. Any questions that you have, anything that came up while you were on that quick break? I think that was like 10 seconds. Okay. If anything does come up, put it in the chat. Steve and Sharice obviously will keep tabs on it. All right, phase 2, planning. Now, this is our second phase of our project management cycle, and it is the most critical phase. So the execution and monitoring, which comes next, is where we spend the bulk of our time in a project management cycle. But planning is where we have the opportunity to help a project succeed or fail. So 75%, it may be more or less now, but it used to be reported a few years ago, it was like 75% of IT projects especially, but projects in general, fail. And the reason for that, and we'll talk about some challenges for project managers in a second, but one of the biggest reasons is that folks had a hard time planning or perhaps skipped some of the steps in the planning phase of project management. And if you all probably heard that classic expression, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. My father said that to me a lot as a child growing up, and I've become a project manager and as a result, so it did something. But planning within your project management cycle, so critical, cannot say that enough. So your goal in this section is to create your roadmap to success. So some key activities that you're going to undertake in this section to help you build that roadmap is creating your project plan, which we will do a sample of all together in a moment. Developing a resource plan. And so this is something that has to do with, and resources can mean physical objects or items. You might need access to building material if you're constructing a house, but it also means people. So if you work in a company that has multiple teams, you might have someone who's part-time helping on your project and part-time still has to do their business as usual or a different project even. And so you want to make sure you have a really clear resource plan that folks can agree to, so that you don't move into a step in a project and you're like, oh shoot, this person's assigned elsewhere, or like, oh shoot, I can't use this saw for something. I'm not a good construction person, so I can manage their projects, can't do the building myself. So resource plan, very important in your project planning cycle. You also want to make sure that you've defined your goals and performance measures. So in the project charter, you've outlined some of those like expectations, those milestones, the end results that you're going for. But you want to make sure you have really clear performance measures and expectations of your team planned out in this phase. After planning, you're going to have a kickoff meeting with your team and walk them through it. You want to make sure that they have a clear understanding of what they will be measured on, and how they can be successful in this project is moving forward. And so this in the planning phase is when you're going to outline those pieces. You also want to make sure that you anticipate risks and create some contingency plans. So again, in your project charter, you've built out perhaps some of the risks that you see coming up, but in the planning phase, you want to make sure that you're building out the mitigation and contingency plans. You're hosting an event outside, weather might be an issue. What's your plan for that? Are you renting a tent? Is there a barn nearby you can use? I don't know why I'm trying to solution for you in this one, but those are the sort of like the risks and contingency planning that you want to make sure you consider in this planning phase. Once you move into execution, things move really quickly. And so you may have some space and time to take on risks that come up that you maybe haven't anticipated, but you want to make sure that anything you've thought of, any risk you've anticipated up until this point, you have a contingency plan so that you don't have to worry about that when you move into execution. You can execute on your contingency plan if you need to. So, key activity in the planning phase of project management is building out our project plan. So we're going to do a similar activity as we did with the project charter. I will share with you all a sample document that you can make a copy of or work within to test a few projects. But before we do, this is I'm like full of quotes today, apparently. It's another one of my favorite quotes, and I use this in a lot of sessions because I think it's true no matter what. If you're setting goals, if you're building out a project plan, if you're creating a business, at the end of the day, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And so that's from Alice in Wonderland. I'm pretty sure. It's definitely Lewis Carroll. I believe it's Alice in Wonderland. And your project plan is your roadmap. So this is the thing that's going to outline for you how you're getting to your end result. Again, if you're in waterfall project management methodology or you're pulling from that system, you likely should have a very clear path that's getting you there. If you're working more within the Agile project management methodology, there may be still some variables that you're working out, but you should know some of those key moments or those key milestones and steps that you're taking to start to build out your project. So your project plan is your roadmap. So some key components that you want to have within your project plan, regardless of which methodology you choose, is your task list of your activities list, the timelines that you want to build out moving forward. What are your hopes, your expected timelines for these? RACI, which is a communication or decision-making matrix, which we are going to talk about today. I hope we have time. Otherwise, I will send you all a one-pager on it. But RACI, which is who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each of these tasks that you're outlining in this timeline. You want to make sure that your milestones are clearly marked. So tasks and activities are things that you're working through on a project. You need to have milestones or moments where you're like, great, here's a deliverable for our client. Here's an opportunity to like celebrate something that's complete, and know that we're on the right track. They're kind of like they're like the key performance indicators, or the moments in the project that you know, oh shoot, we're not on track and we have to reevaluate, or like, great, this milestone's done, we close this section and we move forward. You know, in Agile, that can be the specific sprint you're on. Those can be your milestones or your deliverables, the products that you ship at the end of each sprint. You want to have a risk tracker. So you've mapped out your risks, you have like the contingency plans, but you want to make sure you have something that's telling you, is this risk like imminent? Is this risk a potential? And what like weight are we giving to this? Is this risk something that's going to derail our whole project, or it's going to be like a mild inconvenience? You want to make sure that you have your goals outlined. Those should be top of mind for folks. And so having them and keeping them in that project plan, which you will be checking pretty consistently, is really helpful, really important. Perhaps a project meeting schedule. This one depends on the type of system you're working within, but you want to make sure that it's clearly communicated to folks when they're expected to show up and be in a meeting. And I often like to have at least the expectations of the meeting schedule in my project management plans. Any team expectations, if it's a new team you're working with, I sometimes have a separate sheet or like a separate document that outlines the expectations we're working on as a team, and keep that really close with the project plan, as well as a decision log. The decision log and the meeting schedule pieces I haven't built into our like practice today, just because we don't have a ton of time, but I will share with you what a decision log looks like, as well as that project meeting schedule tracker. And it's really just a way of saying, here was the decision we made, here was other considerations we had, here's who signed off on the decision. And having those logs, again, it's like having a history of the actions that were taken within your project, which is really important as you move into that execution phase and everything's moving really quickly. You want to be able to quickly be like, why did we say this again? Or when did we change our minds on this? And it's outlined and documented for you. And you have that safety net in case anyone questions you. All right. Give me a moment. Can we see the copy of Intro to Project Management practice template? Thank you, Stephen. All right, beautiful. We're gonna practice. So I want you to build out, and I'm only gonna give you like 5 minutes. So let's say we'll have a few minutes to sort of explore the different templates. Again, these are really truncated versions of these templates that I will share with you after this course. But I want you to take a look through each of them and start to build out like maybe the first 3 to 5 steps of your own project plan, using one of these 3 following templates that I'm going to share with you. And similar to the project charter, would love if we could come back with something you learned or a question that you have, a clarification, anything like that. So this is the document you're going to see. Similar to the project charter, you should be given an option to make a copy. And when you open it, it'll look like this. This is my very simplified version of a waterfall project management template. So it has the different phases mapped out from ideation, conceptualization, and then I removed the rest so we don't get too bogged down. But in this project management plan, you have an opportunity to name your project. That's super important. Have a start date, have an end date, map out your goal. And again, your goal could be number of attendees at an experience or number of positive reviews of an app we've launched. And then you can move into mapping out the specific phases. And so we'd love for you to take an opportunity to map like, here's my task, it's within this phase, the start date, the end date, which would give us our duration of the task. And then it also gives you an opportunity to build out something called a Gantt chart. And for those who haven't heard of a Gantt chart before, it's a visual timeline of the time your project's going to take. And so if your project is going to take, if your project is going to take a task is going to take 1 week within a waterfall timeline or a waterfall project management, you want to see the timelines move through sort of like seamlessly and one after another. And so within waterfall, you're not going to see one task completed this week, and then lower down a previous task is going to be completed earlier on in the system. So I'll give you all a moment to mess around with that one. The second one that I've made, again, it's a truncated, shortened version, but it's an agile project management plan. Similarly, you can name your project, you have your start date, your end date, your deliverables list, perhaps a link to a scope statement or your project charter, and then an opportunity for you to fill in the tasks, the people responsible, and the start and end date for each of these tasks. And so this is how it would look in our agile project management. Kanban's like a little tougher to do in Google Sheets. I'm going to be honest with you. I've never actually personally used Kanban in Google Sheets, but wanted to give us something digital we could work on. I generally use Trello or like an online application for Kanban, or honestly, Whiteboard is my favorite way to use Kanban when we can be in the same physical space, but I wanted to try and replicate that Whiteboard in the Google Sheets for you. So similarly, project title, your team, your start and your end date, you want to know the time boxed moments when you're actually actioning on this project. And then these are the 4 columns that I use to track visually the progress of my tasks within a project. So this is where these are the ones that are not yet started that we have to do still. D is where our ones that are in progress would be. E is for testing, and F is the ones that are completed or shipped off to our client. So I'm going to share this link with you in a moment, and I'm going to double check that I've actually shared it with all of you because that's really important. And I didn't. Thank you, Shaylin, for helping with that. All right. If you have any questions as you get started, don't hesitate, obviously. But otherwise, take an opportunity to explore these, to click around through them, and try to fill out any project tasks that you already have on the go and see which one feels best to you, which one feels like this is the best way that I think I can lead my team. I'd be really curious to hear from you all. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes for that. Yes. Let's say 6 minutes. We'll come back at 1:15, have it nice and clean. Yeah, and if you have any questions, let us know. All right, bringing everyone back. We'll give you all a few seconds to return to our lovely faces in Zoom. And I've had a few questions come through in direct message, so thank you for that. And I'm just going to really quickly just walk through this project plan one more time. I've had a few questions about the waterfall project plan specifically. And so I just wanted to show you because there is some functionality that I've built into this sheet, which on one hand can be very helpful, but on the other, if you've never used it before, or if your instructor has perhaps not instructed you as well as they could have, it can be really challenging. So if I was building out this project plan sheet, again, I'm just going to assume that I filled out the top appropriately. If my start date, my launch date, I've named the project, my goals are really clearly outlined. But here's how I would actually use this sheet when I'm ready to go. So once I've started to build out the tasks within my phases, ideation here is where it says task 1. That's actually where I'm going to complete my task. So perhaps in my ideation phase, I need to perform something, a feasibility, let's just put in a feasibility study. That's task 1. And that's going to be, Steve's team is going to take care of it. I'm not going to fill in this just yet. The start date will be, I put it as January 15th because I put that in on this thing. And we're going to end that on January 29th, the week. And so that way, when I move into this, the visualization of my timeline, I know I'm starting on January 15th and I'm ending on the 29th. So if I just put any text or input into the visual timeline piece, it puts a black box there to read that as like, this is visually when you are moving through this task. So you can see it on the timeline. I'm going to do one more just so you can all see. And so let's say we've done our feasibility study. We're going to build our lesson plan document. And I'm I'm going to put Charisse is going to be the team leading this. Thank you very much, Charisse. And this has to happen after our feasibility study because we need to know if this lesson plan is even a thing we can start to think about. And so we know our feasibility study ends that week of the January 29th. So I'm going to put this as like February 2nd, February 5th, because that's the actual date. And we only need 2 weeks for this one. So it's going to end February 12th. And so then it goes like this. And so now we can start to see the waterfall, literally, of how our tasks are being completed as we move towards the end of the project. So I hope that somewhat makes sense. Again, like the deeper walkthrough of these resources is super important. And I apologize, with the short time we have today, I don't have enough time to go through them too in depth. I wanted to make sure that you had access to them and a quick run through of them, but would love to, and we'll share contact information after this. So you can come back and we can meet one-on-one if you like and build out your project plan more concretely. I have been around this block many times, and I like, it takes me moments to fill out a project plan, but I would love and be happy to walk through this with you one-on-one, because sometimes that's much more helpful. All right. Sorry, I'm just going through the questions so I can make sure I try and capture them. Sharon, you have a really great question about the ARCI. Great question. I actually meant to hide that on you before we got into this example, and I apologize. I was messing around with this just before the course started, and I obviously didn't hide them again. We are going to go through that really quickly. So Sharon, if it's okay, and for those who also have a question on what those letters mean, I'm going to cover them in like 3 slides. All right. And there's also some questions around the Agile project management sheet. Specifically, and I appreciate this, the dates at the bottom. Because I've truncated this one, the functionality for the visual timeline is actually not there, and I apologize for that. I will share with you the like full proper version afterwards, and it does automatically pull based on the dates you've included in the start and finish for each task. So it'll start to look not exactly like the waterfall one, because again, in the waterfall, you're moving through tasks like this, and in Agile, sometimes it's more like an overlap like this, if that makes any sense to anybody other than my brain. So I apologize. It is mostly just the fact that I had to make a shorter version of it for this, and that functionality doesn't work quite as well without the full project scale. But again, once we've shared these resources with you, if you have any further questions, I'll make sure that my contact information is available in my Calendly link in case folks want to book a one-on-one or like a one company to Vanessa session. All right. Let me just make sure. Any other questions? I feel like those were the big ones. All right. Beautiful. All right, moving back to our beautiful slides. So we've initiated our project, we've gotten our approval, we've built our project charter, we feel clear on our goals, we've started to map out how we've done our big planning sessions for ourselves, and we've just chosen, our project management tools, methodology. We're ready to go. Or are we? We should be. We should be ready to go by the end of the planning phase. But in order to kick off the execution phase, a really critical piece is hosting a kickoff meeting with your team. This is another thing that seems really small and easy, but it's a critical task and a critical step in your project plan before you move into execution, because it allows, again, that team to come together to get the buy-in from folks who are new to the project, who haven't been in it through the planning phase as much as you have, and to make sure everyone's on the same page and understands where they're going. It's your chance to like motivate your team and inspire them to want to complete this project in a really fun and like powerful way. So your kickoff meeting is really critical. I will share my like sample agenda that I use for every kickoff meeting. I always have slides that go on with it and GIFs, which will probably shock all of you given how this presentation has gone. But having those moments is like a really great way of making sure your team is ready to go, working together and aligned. So some key activities when you're putting together your kickoff meeting and when you're actually running the kickoff meeting is making sure that the goals and deliverables are communicated clearly You've identified your team members and assigned tasks. This kickoff meeting is, if you haven't already done it, this is their opportunity to make sure their time is blocked appropriately so they can support you on this project. You've developed your draft project plan and you want to make sure that you share it with your team. You know, I had that like gif of Oprah at the beginning hosting all those meetings, or like saying everyone gets a meeting. And hopefully you have done that, but this is another opportunity to folks to react to a project plan. So if you go in and someone's like, oh, I'm actually pulled into a different project at this time, I wish I had known. Like, this is the opportunity for you to make adjustments to that draft plan before you truly move into the execution phase. You want to make sure you've defined the metrics that are used for project success and identified and prepared for any potential roadblocks. You've established a communication architecture and schedule. So again, I will share with you like my communication architecture that I use, which is really just a way of how and when we communicate as a team. Is it in a meeting? Is it over Slack or email? What are the things that are going to trigger a communication within my team, and making sure everyone clearly understands that so there aren't any sort of miscommunications, which we'll talk about more in a second, because that's just like the best part of project management. So I really use the sample agenda and the kickoff agenda as a metric of my own preparedness. So if I can fill out my kickoff agenda really seamlessly, if I can build those slides and everything feels clear to me, then I know I'm prepared. If I'm struggling to put together that agenda for the kickoff meeting, then I know I need to continue working through my planning phase. I know I haven't done my due diligence to bring my other team, in order to bring my team members on. If I can't communicate it to myself, I definitely should not be ready to communicate it to other people. Or that's how I think of it. But let's say we've done our kickoff agenda, we're feeling really good about it, we host the meeting, it goes well, maybe someone brought donuts, everyone's motivated, now it's time for execution. So this is our third and our longest phase of the project management cycle. This is where most of the time, the money, people are pulled into a project during this particular phase. You want to make sure the goal as you go through this is that you're moving through your milestones and deliverables really seamlessly as a team and adjusting as needed. So the key activities as we move into the execution phase are our project meetings. And again, the cadence and the types of meetings you have will depend on the methodology you've chosen. And so after today, you'll see you're going to get like a lot of resources, but you're going to get a folder on different types of project plan meetings. And so if you're working through a waterfall project methodology, there's a clear cadence for those meetings and a schedule and agenda that I use for hosting those meetings. If I'm moving through the Agile project management methodology, then I have a different cadence for those meetings as it's like laid out in that methodology, as well as a different agenda and way in which I move through those meetings and the types of things we discuss in each meeting. So I really encourage you, once you've picked your methodology, to get acquainted with the meeting agenda that goes with that methodology so you're able to host really effective and efficient meetings, because everyone will appreciate that. So you've got your project meetings, you are directing and managing this project at this point. You're making sure that the quality is at the level that you want and that your client wants. Information is being distributed. That's within your project team. That might be to supervisors, that might be to clients or funders or external folks from your organization, but making sure that information is shared or someone is sharing that information is definitely the project manager's responsibility. Another big one is managing stakeholder expectations. And so stakeholders can be, again, your supervisor or the CEO of your company. It could be an external funder who's helping with this project. It can be a client who's paying you to take on a project for them, but making sure that you're managing their expectations and communicating a lot and really clearly to them is critical to that relationship and to the success of your project. Sometimes things go wrong. You can do all the planning in the world. Things are still going to need to pivot, even within a waterfall methodology. Things are going to come up. I mean, I think, not to talk about COVID too much, but I feel like COVID has taught us that like things can come up in this world, and we're going to have to pivot. And so if you have that rapport and that relationship early on, having that communication and managing those expectations with your stakeholder is that much easier. And you never want to be in a position where you have to hold information back from someone, because that literally never works out for us. So always be really upfront with folks and make sure that they understand what it is your team is going through and any opportunities that might come up for more time being needed, etc. All right, which brings us to the top three project manager challenges. So if you do some research on this, and I encourage you to, you'll see a lot of really like task specific challenges that project managers encounter. And those are real for sure. And we may have some time to talk through some of those. But the real three project manager challenges, if you survey and chat with other project managers, these are the three things that for them are the hardest. So it's not for the project team, but for the individual, for the person running the projects. And I will speak for myself. This is a huge part for me as I'm running projects. These are the three that I am most affected by more often than not. So I put these in a weird order on the slides. I'm going to start from number 3, even though it's at the bottom, because it's sort of like the first one's the biggest challenge. So, but the third one, the one that's often talked about, or sorry, that's not often talked about, but is often felt, is your own personal skills. So your own soft skills, perhaps as a leader, or your confidence in running a project or working within a specific space, as well as any technical gaps that you have. There's a lot of tools and systems out there now for supporting project managers that are very technical based. And if you're still getting comfortable with that, this can be a real challenge if you're not able to fully utilize those tools. Resources is another one. Again, like working in startups or working within the not-for-profit space, having budget can be a challenge, and you may not have all of the money in the world to pull off this project perfectly, but your budget, being able to manage that budget is really important. So your budget, your team members' time and potential conflicting priorities, as well as any physical resources. And that chunk is sort of the second biggest project manager challenge. And the number one, and this one is like why I talk about this. So Allison, yes, you nailed it. Project team. And that includes their personalities, their working style, their team dynamics, ability, or perhaps opportunity to improve on collaboration, managing their own performance, or managing their performance, especially remotely, if that's the case for your team, and working through the cross-functional communication. Like team member dynamics is actually, for me, the largest challenge in managing a project. I can set up a Gantt chart, I can give you a task list and a timeline, but when conflicts arise or when folks aren't communicating with each other the way that they both like, that's where things really start to get bumpy. So how do we deal with these? Great question, folks. Communication. And I will say this till I'm blue in the face, and I know it sounds vague perhaps, but there like truly is no like supplement, or there's no alternative to proper communication. Everything can go wrong in a project, but if your team is communicating, you can pull it together. Google did this like 4-year study at one point on their team dynamics and the teams that were most successful. And it was the teams that felt psychologically safe within their workplace and were able to communicate clearly and effectively as a team that succeeded above else, regardless of the roadblocks put in their place. So team communication, above anything else, will help you be successful in your project. So creating a communication architecture to outline how and when you communicate with your team. And again, I will share with you mine, which is like, if this happens, here's how we communicate. If you have a question about this, here's how we communicate. I like to put some thought into it myself. I have a framework that I've used for years, and I always bring that forward, but I also make sure it's a collaborative effort. I want to hear from my team how they like to be communicated to. How do they like to get feedback? When would they like to get feedback? Having that decided up front is so helpful, so that when those tough moments come, you've already established how you're going to handle them and your team members are ready for it. The second part that's really important is those clear expectations and goals. And that's why, and I apologize that we can't run the whole session on how to pick your right goals, but making sure you select the right end goal or end post for your team is really important. So they have a clear understanding of where they're going. And that will make it that much easier for them if they need to pivot, because you know you're not changing where you're going, but you may have to change how you get there through a project. And the pivot is that much easier if they still clearly understand where they're going and why that pivot is happening. So there really is like no silver bullet, as I call it, when it comes to project management. The closest thing that you have is communication. So if you and your clients and team are on the same page, then again, when things go wrong, you can handle it. You can handle it as a team. You as project manager are always going to be the leader or should be the leader, but you really are a team. Now, Sharon, you had a question about the ARCI letters that were in those project plans. And this is something that's called RACI or ARCI. I'm not sure if anyone has heard of this before. If not, there's tons more research on it, but I wanted to give you a quick rundown today because regardless of which project plan you choose, regardless of the methodology you choose or the tool or system that you implement with your team, having an understanding of how you communicate with each other and the responsibilities that folks hold within a task was going to save you 100% of the time. This has been like the best tool in my toolbox as a project manager is outlining right off the bat something called RACI. So it is a project management matrix, and it clarifies the roles and responsibilities across a project, a program, or an organization. So you can use this on a project, but you can also use this in your business as usual as well. It's a really great tool for outlining how we communicate together. It's a guide for how and when to communicate across teams and the department so that everyone is informed and is up to date on progress. So it's really like a simple grid system for understanding your role within a project. The reason we use something like RACI, the reason I push communication so strongly, especially in the execution phase of project management, is to solve for role confusion, which is like the lack of information or understanding of your role and responsibility within a specific task. It also should help with miscommunication. So most common issue within companies and within projects, again, is that miscommunication. And it takes constant work to address this. So RACI or project management is not a like set it and forget it system. You have to set it and you have to maintain it. And RACI is one of the ways that we can help maintain our project management system once we get going. So what does RACI stand for, you're all wondering? Because I've been talking about it for 2 slides. RACI, or again, ARCI, but I use RACI, refers to responsible, accountable, or authorization, consulted, and informed. So they're a way of defining your role within a specific task. So within any given task, there should be one person who is responsible for actioning or completing that task. And that person has to understand that very clearly. They should know if it's their responsibility to get this task done, and they will be titled as responsible. The other roles that you want to have in it is someone who's accountable or who's authorizing this task. And it's usually the person that R is accountable to. So their manager, or in this case, the project manager, may be the person accountable for ensuring that this task is getting done and getting done at the level that you see fit. So you want to make sure that it's getting done in a timely manner, but it's also going to be your responsibility to sign off on that task once it's done. So the second last, and these 2 are the hardest ones actually. So knowing who's responsible for a task, very important, but often easy to identify. Knowing who they're accountable to, again, really important, but also often easy to identify. Where folks trip up and where the most miscommunication happens is in the second 2, which is consulted and informed. And that's why they're so important. It's really easy to forget to consult and inform folks. So you want to make sure you are outlining this early. So consulted is who needs to be consulted in this decision or this task. So they're not going to be the actioner, but they will likely have knowledge or information that's critical to the completion of this task. Let's say I'm going to use Steve and Charisse again as an example. Steve is going into a community to teach a program. He's responsible for building that program and delivering it, but Charisse may have worked with that community before, and she has really critical knowledge that Steve can use and should use to ensure that his program is the best it can be. So Charisse should be consulted while Steve is completing the lesson plan for the program he's going to run. The last one that we like to talk about, and that's really important, is who needs to be informed. Now, everyone in there grandmother love to be consulted. I'm just going to say this, like one of my issues when I first started project management, so I consulted everybody. And I do believe consultation is super important, but there comes a time when you just need to action a decision or move forward on a task. And so knowing who needs to be consulted and separating those from who just needs to be informed that a task is being complete is really important. And so don't be shy as project manager to draw those lines. Thank folks for their consultation and their contribution, but know when it is their time to be informed and their time to be consulted. And so informed is really just you don't get to participate in the outcome of the decision, but you do have to know that a task is being done. Let's say, again, in this program Steve wants to run within a community, Steve is building the program. He's consulting with Charisse, who's already worked within that program. And perhaps I didn't think of it in time. I thought I would get there as I talked. Perhaps I'm like another programmer who's going to be working within the similar community. I'm not in any way involved in what Steve's doing, but I need to know when he's ready to start his delivery because it'll affect my own timelines. And so I don't get to have a say in when Steve starts, but I should be informed so I'm able to execute on my side accordingly. I hope that kind of makes sense. But so those are the four important categories: responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. When you're building out your project plan, when you're moving into your execution phase, if you feel like there's confusion from the team on how they should interact or approach a task, building out this RACI is really important and can be helpful. So common questions when it comes to this or comes to any sort of communication architecture that I often see is, can I have more than one role in a task? And the answer is yes, you can, though it's not common. And you want to make sure that you try and distill down as far as possible so that it's clear who's responsible and who's accountable. Great question, Kelly. Sorry, I'm not good at reading and continuing to talk. I wish I had that skill, but I don't. I don't know if anyone does, to be honest. Anyway, so I'm going to finish this and then Kelly, I will answer your question. So can I have more than one role in a task? Yes, not common. You may need to be consulted in the completion of a task. If I'm Steve's boss and I need to know, or I need to be consulted on something, but I'm also going to sign off on whether or not he has completed that task, those two roles can sometimes overlap. Though again, more often than not, I really push teams to try and keep it to one individual or one team per. Can more than one person have a role in a task? Again, yes, but that's really not ideal and it kind of can lead to more miscommunication. So when you're breaking down your tasks, you want to make sure, especially as you're getting into the execution phase, and this might be within like mini project teams, you want to make sure that you break those tasks down clearly enough so there's only one person actioning and one person accountable. Now, because of time, I'm going to move really quickly through these next two slides. So RACI is not a silver bullet. Again, there isn't one when it comes to project management. There is nothing that will replace a strong project manager who's leading their team and their project effectively, but it is a helpful process in outlining responsibility. And it's really important for helping us move forward and try and like find those miscommunication opportunities before they've even happened. RACI is not in and of itself a communication tool. And Kelly, I think this sits with your question. I apologize, I'm just going to pull it up. Yes, yeah, so communication. So RACI is not in and of itself a way of communicating. So if I need to be informed or consulted on a task, noting it in the project plan is not in and of itself consultation, or not in and of itself informing me. It's really up to the team members to decide how they want to inform or consult folks, though I often encourage consultation to be in a meeting and the information to be in a specific message or as like an addendum within the project plan meeting. So if you're meeting weekly with your team and there's someone who needs to be informed, ensuring that they're there to hear that information, and then you sign off that they've heard that information, and then you're able to move forward. I'm just trying to make sure that this is in fact what Kelly has asked. Yes, and then I think, Kelly, the second part to your question is where that's actually noted in the plan, and we will do that in a moment together. Though unfortunately, we're not going to do it as like an independent task because we are going to run out of time, but I'm going to show you really quickly how that looks. So I'm going to jump back over Can everyone see the waterfall project plan template again? Yes, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so how I put these in my project plans is really closely in line with the task that I'm outlining. So as an example, Steve's team is the one responsible for building out their feasibility study. But who's accountable to that, who's responsible, who's being consulted, and who's informed is broken down beside it. Again, this is something I see a lot with newer project managers. I see these tabs hidden, and I can understand that that can be a bit of a challenge, but where you can build this out is really helpful for avoiding those miscommunications further on. So I'm going to use this example. I will be Steve's boss. So I will be accountable. Steve will be responsible. I wrote responsible because I was saying the word responsible. Good job. Steve is responsible. Charisse is going to be consulted because she is the next person on the task. She's going to be building out that lesson plan, and she likely will have some really valuable information for us as we create this feasibility study. And let's say Alana is our marketing team, and she just needs to know that we're moving forward. We've done the feasibility study. We're moving forward with this project. So she would be informed. And so this is how I like to outline these pieces within a project plan so I can see really clearly. Again, as a project manager, this is not my communication in and of itself, but it means that I get to go to Steve and be like, great, have you, like, this is done. I'm now going to sign off on this task as the accountable, but have you consulted with Charisse? Has Alana been informed? And Steve can validate that those pieces have happened. So this is like just another support system for you as a project manager to make sure that your team members are chatting amongst themselves and that you're holding them accountable to that. Kelly, I hope that sort of answered your question, but please let me know if it didn't, and I'd be happy to walk through. All right, so I apologize we don't get to fully practice. So I do encourage you afterwards again to like go through the resources and take a look through your tasks and your subtasks or milestones and try to build out who on your team you would have as responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. All right, so this is our fourth phase. Yes, Allison, I promise I will email you all of the things, as well as this presentation and my Calendly in case you want to chat more with me. So I'm generally delightful. All right, I think I am. Anyways, control and monitoring, part 4. So this is our fourth phase. So we're in execution, we're moving through our project. As that's happening, we also want to make sure that we are controlling and monitoring. So this is our fourth phase. It's its own phase because it has some unique key activities that are really important, but it does happen in tandem with our execution phase. We don't want to not monitor our project as we go through it. That just feels like not a good idea. So the goal for the control and monitoring is, again, making sure things are moving in the right direction, but also that we are adjusting as needed. So this is where course correction might have to happen. So your key activities here are your managing your resources. Resources budget especially is something that changes often within, or can change often within, a project plan, and you want to make sure you're keeping on top of that and adjusting as needed. You're monitoring your project performance. So as you go through your execution phase, you're making sure the quality of it is where you'd like it to be. But this is also your opportunity to like keep a finger on the pulse of your health of your project. And that can be the actual milestones, but it can also be your team. Again, especially like managing projects, sorry, not to bring up COVID again, but managing projects through COVID and especially managing projects remotely. I have found team burnout has been exponentially more challenging than it was when I was in person with folks. And it's because there are so many more conflicting priorities right now. So knowing how the health of your team and the health of the project and keeping on top of that as you monitor it is really important. Again, you're managing your risks. Any sort of risks you've identified before, you should have those contingency plans and action them as needed, but you're also checking for new risks that come up as you move through a project. Hopefully you've identified them all from the beginning, but they may have new ones that come up. You're also having status meetings and reports. So depending on the size and scale of the project, I have status meetings weekly often. And I often have reports that go both to my project team as well as any stakeholders or clients I'm working with. If I'm managing, when I was managing some like really huge projects in Toronto or even like globally, I had to send reports to like folks internationally. I wasn't always able to get them in the same space, and having a report that's like gut checking on the key risks, the key deliverables and goals, and making sure those are shared with folks in a timely manner is really helpful when those meetings are not doable. And it's also, again, doing my due diligence to make sure folks are informed. And so if they can't come to a meeting and they don't read my report, that's a breakdown on their end, but I need to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to support them in accessing that information. And then as needed, we are modifying our project plan. Again, with waterfall, that's not ideal. You want to make sure that you've had those steps mapped out in advance, but you might have to pivot things a slight bit. That doesn't mean you go back to a new phase, but you might have to say, push things a day, and being on top of them and knowing that early on is going to help you mitigate and plan for that change. Brings us to the project management triad of constraints. This is my favorite thing. And this is why project charters are so important. And this is why I get everyone to physically sign off on them, because inevitably in a project, someone's going to come to you and they're going to need to change the timing of something, the budget of something, or the amount of work you're doing. And that's what the project management triad of constraints refers to. So you cannot adjust one of these three things without affecting one or both of the other. If a client wants you to finish a project faster, you're probably going to have to hire new people to help move that work along more quickly. And that's going to affect your budget. If someone wants you to do more work, and that's the scope piece, you may need more time to complete that work, or you may need to hire more folks, or it might be both. And so knowing this triad of constraints is really important, and communicating it to your client and making sure you can go back to your project charter as that safety net to say like, hey, this was our agreed upon budget. Here's how this is going to change if we update this scope. Scope is the one that I most often get requests for. You're moving through a project or a product, and all of a sudden they want to have like a big event added to the release of their product, or they want to add a new feature. Within tech spaces, especially, adding new features can seem so simple on the client side because they may not have an understanding of what that actually means on the tech side. And so they ask for like a new menu item, and they're like, that's actually 3 weeks of work and several $1,000s. And being able to have those conversations with them is that much easier if you've built that rapport, but being able to identify this triad of constraints for them can be really helpful when it comes down to it. This is a Vanessa secret that also is a bit of a project management secret. I do build buffer into everything. I don't build a ton of buffer. I don't want to be lying to my client that we need $1 million when I only need 10,000. And I don't want to be telling them that it's going to take me a year when it's only going to take me 2 months. Like, no, but I do like to build a week or a few weeks into a project as buffer to mitigate for some of those risks, or to mitigate for like a small scope change, because it means when I go to them and I can say, they ask for something new, I can go to them and say, I'm able to do this because we're further ahead than I thought, but here's still the implications of this change. There should always be a communication around the implications of a change. And often it comes back to this triad of constraints. Yes, Allison, under promise and over deliver. That's like the not-for-profit like slogan, or that's always like my goal. And again, like, you're not under promising with an extreme degree, but you want to make sure you have that space, because even when you're building out a project plan and a project charter, you can think you know everything, and then 3 weeks in, you realize COVID has come, or like someone is not perhaps as strong at a programming language as they said they once were, and you need to support them with some professional development. Things come up. And so having that buffer, but also again, having that rapport with your client will set you up for success. And so don't be shy to communicate the implications of any changes that come up in this project. Especially again, with new project managers, this is an area I see as an opportunity for improvement, because folks are perhaps nervous to tell their clients no. I have learned it's okay to tell clients no. I took it the hard way. I had to learn JavaScript in 24 hours. I didn't. I was not able to complete this, but I put myself in a position where I had to learn JavaScript really quickly to complete a task on a project, and it didn't go well. So I have learned no lying, or sorry, not no lying. I mean, yes, that too. Don't be shy, and it's okay to say no. All right. Closing. We're almost done, guys. You're doing great. All right, closing. This is our final step in project management lifecycle, but not to be overlooked. So oftentimes you're moving through your execution phase, you're getting to the end, and this is where I see folks start to slip. All of those like key frameworks that you've put in place, those great organization techniques and tactics you've been implementing to move through your execution and control and monitoring phases, start to dwindle a little bit here because you see the finish line in sight, but it's not over until it's over. And I really encourage folks to use this closing phase to keep that momentum going through it. So you want to make sure in this phase you've taken a final inventory of all your deliverables. What's happened and what hasn't? What do you need more time for? What do we need to say no to or go back to the client with? Again, that should have been happening through it, but there may be something in the end goal that you're like, oh, we need another 3 days or something. But taking the final inventory of the deliverables and putting that together into a proper report, really important. You also want to make sure that you hand the project off. So again, projects are supposed to be time boxed. They need to end. And so you want to make sure that you take an opportunity to train whoever needs to be trained on how to do this, to have a formal presentation to your client or the team that will be taking this over and outlining for them where all the documentation is and how they're going to be moving this forward now that the project is over. I also really encourage a postmortem, and by encourage, I mean mandate within my own projects and would encourage you to do the same, because a postmortem, once you've done one project, chances are you're going to take on another. And this is your opportunity to learn from your team, to learn from any mistakes that happened, what did and didn't work, and what's something you'd like to do differently next time. And having that open conversation with your teams and even sometimes with clients, one, can ensure that they want to work with you again, but two, it means you're just going to be that much better off the next time. So don't be shy to seek feedback after a project is finished. Communicating your success with your team, very important, as well as communicating it with stakeholders and any executives. This is your moment to brag about, the work you've done, but also the work your team has done and making sure that that's recognized. And then celebrating. So I know that sounds really silly, but I always host a final project like gathering or games night or something as a way of thanking my team members for everything they've done. Projects can get really sticky as you go through them, and this for me is really important because it means that I'm that much more likely to be able to work with these folks later. So thanking them and acknowledging their hard work and like having a moment to celebrate what it is you've completed and moved forward is really important to closing off this project the right way and feeling positive moving forward. Whew. Okay, that's it. So 6 minutes to spare. What questions do you have? And thank you all sorry, I didn't wait the 10 seconds. I will, I promise. But thank you all so much for your participation in this. I feel like, working through these sessions, I generally do them in person and they're really fun. And we do lots of like whiteboarding and sticky notes everywhere. But this is like, it was really, really fun for me regardless. Tasman, what tools / programs do you use to manage multiple projects, general operations at all? Great question. I really wish I had like a short and sweet answer to you. So I have used and have had a lot of success. If you have the budget for it, I have used Asana. That's a great one for managing multiple projects and having the visibility into team members like ability and timelines. So that one's really great. However, I am a firm believer that you can manage a project with pen and paper. That might sound Looney Tunes to everybody who's like doesn't get into that the same way. But I think that there's a lot of free tools out there. Google Sheets is a great one that can help you manage a project regardless of its size and scope. And so for me, again, it really comes down to the project manager or program manager, if there's a number of projects under you, finding a system that works for them and their team. And so that will depend on budget. It'll depend on a number of factors, but you can manage a project with a whiteboard and some paper, so long as you're like communicating and having the cadence of the right meetings to move through this process seamlessly. Oh, thanks, Steve. There is a free option. Yes. Wait, is it free forever or just like as a trial? I thought it was just the trial, but maybe I've lied to you all and it's free, and then that would be wonderful. Asana is a really good tool. Trello is another one. If you're interested in the Kanban methodology and you want to do it with a remote team, it's like a digital Kanban board, and they have a pretty good free version. There's like a limit to the number of team members you can use on it, but it's usually okay. Okay, so like Asana, free for up to 5 people. This is brand new information to me. See, you learn something every day. Thank you. So Asana is great, and it isn't an industry favorite for some of us. I've really enjoyed working with it, but again, I will say 80% of my projects have been managed through Google Sheets. That's not always easy. There's a huge lift on the project manager to like keep things going when you're doing it in that fashion. But it is doable, all that to say. Like, I'm a firm believer that you shouldn't have to like pay for or use fancy tools to keep things moving, so long as you are like setting up systems that work for you and your team. But I will also, having said that, in the folder that I share with you all, there is like a list. I have a doc of some like tools and resources that you can use and the things like where they may be most helpful. It's also like an open document, so feel free to add things to it. Don't take them away if you can, but add things to it as much as you like. And that's really, yeah. Any other questions? 2 minutes left. That was forward. 2 minutes left.
Okay, so I think if we don't have any more questions, then we're all set to wrap up. So I just want to say thank you to Vanessa and to the team from Pinnguaq. As Vanessa was saying, we will share all of the workshop materials and a link to access her calendar if you want to set up any follow-up meetings. So thank you so much for spending your afternoon with the Innovation Cluster and with Pinnguaq. We appreciate your time, and I hope you all have a great day.
Yay. Thank you all.